not a speck. And here's me thinking it was only the dust that was holding you together. It makes you wonder where all this dust actually comes from. I heard somewhere that it's 90% human skin. Nasty, I know, when you think about it. But how does that work in a house that hasn't been lived in for months? I tell you, it's one of life's great enigmas, and not one I fancy solving in a hurry. No, I'll just keep flicking around with me duster, and hope for the best. It's a funny sort of job, this. For a start, I got it through an agency, not my usual source of employment at all. And Miss Braithwaite called, ever such a high tinkly voice, and asked if I'd be happy to take on the challenge of a famous actor's northern residence. It's Barrington Squires, actually, she says, and she drops her voice a couple of octaves. I gather I'm supposed to be impressed. I didn't like to tell her I'd never heard of him. Really? I said. I didn't know we had a northern residence. Or any residence at all, for that matter. Oh, yes, she says. He's been working in London for the past 6 months, and now he's coming home for a little break before the award ceremony. Obviously, I'm not up to speed with any of this. I must confess I don't really do celebrities. Anyway, I thought a job's a job. So here I am, in what can only be described as the upmarket side of town. It's quite an ugly sort of house, actually. But because it's mostly hidden from the road by a massive wrought iron fence and towering privet hedge, its unattractive appearance is thankfully shrouded in mystery from the innocent passer-by. The agency had sent me a key, so I let myself in and stood in the hallway, gazing up a spectacularly hideous staircase and wondering where to start. I'd never felt such an air of gloom in my entire life. Whoever this Barrington Squires chap is, celebrity or not, he's unlikely to be the life and soul of the party. Anyway, I cracked on, and I'm quite pleased with myself. I've actually got quite a lot done this morning. I've even got most of these dust sheets off the furniture. Oh, bloody heck. Should have done this first. Now I'll have to start on these fiddly ornaments again. About working in an empty house is I can take me coffee break whenever I like. And kind considerate Mr. Barrington Squires had left a couple of spoonfuls of instant in a jar in the kitchen. I had to chuck the greenish contents of a carton of milk left out on the countertop though, so his consideration does have its limits. Fortunately, I'm partial to a black coffee, so no complaints. Lovely. I've had a bit of a snoop round this morning. All that reverence from Miss Braithwaite at the agency had got me intrigued. Who exactly is this Barrington Squires? And what has he done to merit an award and a 2-octave drop in the lady's voice when she mentions him? Turns out he's done quite a bit in the world of the theatre and television too. The walls of what I assume to be his study are positively bristling with framed photos of said Mr. Squires in company with various members of the great and the good, all smiling in that you must know who I am kind of way. I actually recognise some of them. I was just getting ready for a quick flick round in the study when my mobile rang. It was Miss Braithwaite from the agency, checking perhaps that I hadn't smashed any of the great man's priceless ornaments. "I hope all's well there, Mrs. Brimley," she says. "I'm sure you realise what a very important job we've entrusted you with, but of course your reputation precedes you." Flattery will get you everywhere, I thought. And of course, this little extra chat gives me a chance to delve a bit deeper into the general situation. Without appearing nosy, you understand. "This award you mentioned," I say, "what exactly is Mr. Squires getting it for? A film? A bit of Shakespeare?" "Oh, do you know," she says, and I didn't think her voice could rise any higher, but it did. He's been nominated in the Television Awards for a children's animated series. You must have heard of it, Mrs. Brimley. Freddie the Flea. He does the voice. Sorry, I say. Well, she's not really listening. She probably feels she's given enough of her time to a humble cleaner. Just to let you know, she says, Mr. Squires may be popping back there later just to collect a few things. So glad you're keeping busy, Mrs. Brimley. And she rings off. See the Flea. I say it over to myself a few times, just to get the idea into my head. And then I look at all the photos gracing the walls. A grown man, earning his living by pretending to be a flea, and up for an award for it too. I tell you, the more I hear of the world's doings, the more perplexed I become. But one thing's certain, for a man who's famous for being the voice of a tiny little flea, he's got a bloody big house. Oh God, did you hear that? It's the front door. Well, I've met him. As soon as I heard the door, I ran down the stairs and encountered the great man in the hallway. I don't really know what I was expecting, but he definitely wasn't it. You see, in the photos on the wall, he'd appeared quite imposing in a crinkly sort of way, and I'd imagined he'd have one of those big booming actors' voices, you know, the sort that reaches the back of the stalls without the aid of a microphone. But nothing could have been further from the truth. For a start, he must have been standing on a box when those photos were taken, and a fairly large box at that. Can't be taller than 5'5", with thin wispy hair, oddly coiffured to give the illusion of volume. Smart overcoat though, with velvet lapels and teamed with a red silk neckerchief. Yeah, quite the dandy, actually. Then he opened his mouth, and out came the voice, reedy and weedy, the true voice of a flea. I take it, he says, that you're a Mrs. He looks at his watch as though he thinks it might remind him. Brimley, I prompt him, Mrs. Violet Brimley, widow of this parish. Ah, yes, that's right, he says. Brimstone, of course. I hope he's better at remembering his lines. He brushes past me and makes for the stairs. I've just called by to collect a few essentials, he says, and his reedy little voice wafts its way down to me. I shan't be staying here tonight, Mrs. Brimstone, so just carry on, won't you? Spick and span, that's what we need. Well, spick and span is my speciality, and I open my mouth to tell him as much. But he's out of earshot, diving into the upstairs gloom without a backward glance. I collect me accoutrements and head into the kitchen. I open the fridge and examine its contents. If he were a famous scientist investigating the growth of bacteria, I say to myself, I'd be proud of him. It didn't stay long. I was just finishing disposing of the last unmentionable object from the fridge when I heard his footsteps in the hallway. The front door slammed and he was gone. I can't say I was expecting a cheery farewell, so I wasn't disappointed. Having actually met him though, I felt more intrigued than ever about Freddie the Flea. I'd noticed upstairs in the study a small television mounted on the wall, and on the table below it, a rather interesting DVD. It must be time for lunch, I thought. So I grabbed my packet of sandwiches, made for the study, selected the aforesaid DVD, and settled myself down to watch. And you know something? I couldn't take my eyes off the screen. I watched 3 episodes of Freddie the Flea, back to back. And I have to say, I'm a fan. It's a charming little cartoon about a family of cats and the jolly fun Freddie has in jumping from one to the other. Really intended for the under 5s, of course, but There was something about Freddie and his comic timing that really appealed to me. Well done, Mr. Barrington Squires, I thought. I don't know anything about acting, of course, but I suspect it may be harder than it looks. I'm kind of hoping that he might show up later before I knock off. I may even ask him for his autograph. It's my second day here, and I've just met him for the second time. A much more profitable exchange with the great man, actually. After I mentioned in suitably humble tones that I was a fan of his, he became quite expansive. An award for a children's programme is gratifying enough, he says, leaning against the mantelpiece and lighting a ciggy, but it's a far cry, naturally, from my best work. I'm classically trained, you know. Really? I say. Oh yes, Mrs. Brimstone, he says, puffing smoke towards me in a heedless manner. During one memorable season in Stratford, I gave them my Duncan in the Scottish play. Doesn't he get murdered quite early on? I ask. But he's not in the mood for interruptions. He waves his ciggy in the air and declaims, my plenteous joys, wanton in fullness, seek to hide themselves in drops of sorrow, etc. I remember those immortal lines to this very day. And then he fixes me with a quizzical stare as though he expects something. Thus prompted, I give him a clap, and he beams. Thank you, my dear Mrs. Brimstone, he says in one of those ultra-modest voices actors use at the Oscars. And now I must hasten away. I've a very important press conference in just over an hour. And before I could reply, he's off, through the door, down the stairs and away. It was only then I remembered I was going to ask for his autograph. I'm not what you'd call an avid telly watcher. Sometimes at home I have it on in the background, you know, as a bit of moving wallpaper. But last night, as I was getting my bit of supper, I suddenly heard his name. And there was our special correspondent reporting for Luke North, complete with microphone and excited yet serious expression. Barrington Squires, the actor famous as the voice of Flea, appears to have jumped into some hot water, she says. Following this afternoon's press conference to promote his appearance at the upcoming awards ceremony, Mr. Squires was asked for his autograph by a 5-year-old boy waiting outside. The boy and his mother were rudely brushed aside as the actor made for a waiting car. Our earlier footage shows what happened. I stopped my supper preparations and plonked myself down on the settee. Something told me that their earlier footage wasn't going to be all that complimentary. An indignant woman appears on the screen, holding a wailing child by the hand. A nasty little brat, that's what he called my son, she says, and she's near to tears herself. How could he? My little Darren watches Freddie the Flea every day and loves it. We'll never watch another episode, and he can kiss goodbye to his bleep award, the stuck-up hypocrite. Thank heavens for censorship, I thought. There was quite a bit more of this, but I grabbed the remote and hit the mute button. I watched her mouthing away for a bit, and then I switched it off. Oh, Mr. Squires, I thought, how are the mighty fallen? And something told me that on my next visit I was going to need a certain amount of tact and diplomacy to deal with the situation. But I'm famous for that. And anyway, here I am. I turned up this morning as usual, hoping against hope for an empty house. But when I saw his oh-so-swish overcoat hanging in the hallway, I steeled myself for what was to come. He was sitting at his desk in the study, looking as if he'd just been attacked by a flock of angry budgerigars. His expensive coiffure was ruffled beyond redemption, and as he looked at me, I could see what must have been traces of tears on his cheeks. "Lost, lost," he declaimed. "All my hopes are dashed, Mrs. Brimstone, dashed beyond salvation." Never mind King Duncan. He should have played King Lear. I take a couple of steps into the room. "I saw it," I say, "on the news last night." "Of course you did," he said, "you and millions of others. It's the end of my chances of an award. The end of my career. All because of some snivelling little..." He catches my eye and stops abruptly. I mean, he says. But I interrupt him. "You mean it came out all wrong, Mr. Squires," I tell him. "You mean you were tired and tense. You were overworked. We all say things we don't mean when we're under stress. That's true, isn't it?" And light dawns on his face. He looks as though he's just been saved from drowning. Yes, he says. "That's exactly right. Stress. Overwork. Exactly." "I'm just finishing up here, Mr. Squires," I tell him. "Will you be wanting anything further?" But he's busy keying in a number on his mobile. "My agent, Mrs. Brimley," he explains. "He'll know how to word the press statement. Sterling chap, my agent. Hello, Derek? Yes, now, about this spot of bother." It was only then I realised he'd actually got my name right. Wonders will never cease. "I've just come down here to collect my accoutrements before I head off. It's nearly 5 o'clock and I must get home to put the telly on. I wouldn't want to miss another episode of Freddie the Flea. Not in a million